Mog was originally intended to have his own questline involving a joinable covenant. Unused quest files in the game's code include logic for joining him, with flags linked to late-game areas and prompts like, "Will you become my subordinate?" and "Will you make an oath?" While no dialogue has been found, he does have unused animations that appear to be tied to this cut content. At one point in development, Vare may have been intended to send the player to Round Table Hold if they refused Melina's accord. Early in development, Elden Ring was originally titled Great Rune. There was a scrapped questline involving Gostok, where he would reveal, or claim, that he was Godric's son. The player would then be able to find a crown and offer it to him, furthering his story. With the quest cut, however, Gostok remains a solitary figure in the castle, only playing a minor role if Nephili's questline is completed. The spirit summoning system in Elden Ring was originally much more complex. Early versions required players to locate rebirth monuments in the world and use a limited-use consumable to summon spirits. In a later iteration, players even needed to equip a specific talisman just to activate the consumable. When Elden Ring first launched, data miners found that several NPCs had mostly or fully completed questlines that weren't accessible in-game, leaving those characters stuck in place without any resolution. A patch released a few weeks later added some of these quests back in, implying their absence may have been unintentional. Interestingly, other quests remained dummied out, like Kale's, or were completely removed from the game files, such as Rico's. Data mining Dark Souls 3 reveals that the Deacons of the Deep boss fight was originally intended to have a second phase, where Aldrich would appear midway through the battle. While this concept was scrapped, it appears to have been repurposed for Renala's boss fight in Elden Ring, which features a similar multi-phase structure. Unused dialogue from Shadow of the Erd Tree reveals Saint Trina thanking the player for killing and thereby freeing Miquella before her own death. Evidence suggests the Knights Cavalry were originally intended to be more than just mini-bosses, roaming threats that actively hunted the player at night. From Software has explored similar ideas before, like the Grim Reapers in Demon's Souls, the Black Knights in Dark Souls, and the Pursuer in Dark Souls 2, all of which were scaled back to limited encounters in the final game. Thanks in part to Elden Ring's unique hype cycle, years of silence followed by a sudden surge of information that generated massive buzz, combined with overwhelmingly positive reviews at launch, a 97 on Metacritic, the highest score for any FromSoft game by a margin of at least 5 points. The game sparked an unprecedented influx of new players to the Souls series. By March 5th, Elden Ring had nearly 9 times the peak concurrent player count of Dark Souls 3 on Steam and sold 13.4 million copies within its first month. For comparison, Dark Souls 3 took 4 years to hit 10 million. Elden Ring would eventually reach 25 million units sold, making it Bandai Namco's best-selling game ever. Under the Bandai Namco label, only Pac-Man and Tamagotchi have sold more, both pre-merger. The Astal enemies were likely intended to appear in above-ground field encounters, but this concept was scaled back, leaving only 2 appearances in the final game. Their original meteor crash animation, possibly meant for their entrance or attack, was ultimately repurposed for Radahn's phase transition. The ability to charge spells for a stronger effect in Elden Ring was actually planned for Dark Souls 2, but it was ultimately cut from the final release for reasons that remain unknown. A cut set of dialogue from Godfrey suggests there was once an intro sequence planned, possibly an animatic, a full cutscene, or even a playable prologue. Notably, the lines reveal that Godfrey was fully aware of Marika's intent to shatter the Elden Ring, and that the player may have been among the Tarnished who followed him into exile after she stripped him of grace. The dynamic day-night cycle in Elden Ring, along with enemies changing based on the time of day, appears to be inspired by Bloodborne, which was originally intended to include a similar system before it was cut for unknown reasons. A comparable feature was also planned for Dark Souls 3, but it seems to have been scrapped early in development. The Banished Knights in Elden Ring, both their enemy design and armor set, were created using existing and unused art assets from Bloodborne, specifically from a cut boss known as the Cainhurst Dragoon. A scrapped questline featured a sentient silver tear named Asimi. Initially, she begged for mercy, then offered strength if consumed. She would interact with the player at sites of grace, even allowing Melina to converse with her. The player could find chalices in each eternal city to empower her, but once all were gathered, Asimi would leave and reappear as a foe, seemingly intoxicated by power. Her role is unclear, but her concept likely influenced the Mimic Tear boss fight, where she would have allowed players to create a duplicate of herself to fight. The open-world nature of Elden Ring can be traced back to Dark Souls 2, as it was originally intended to be an open-world game before the limitations of 7th-gen console hardware forced changes. Similarly, Demon's Souls also had early plans for an open world, but the developers lacked the resources to bring that vision to life at the time. In the run-up to Shadow of the Erd Tree in early 2024, Miyazaki was asked about the future of the Elden Ring IP. He made it clear that From Software had no plans for additional DLC or a sequel. However, he made no mention of potential spin-offs. Then at the Game Awards in December 2024, a trailer for Elden Ring Nightreign was revealed, announcing a planned release in 2025. The last giant in Dark Souls 2 was originally conceived as a mostly stationary turret-style boss. In this early version, it was significantly larger than the final design and would hurl massive fireballs at players as they approached. While the concept was eventually made more mobile, it closely resembles the fire giant from Elden Ring, whose boss design was built upon this earlier idea. An alternate version of the Elden Lord ending, known as the Age of Absolute, was once planned for Elden Ring. However, all that remains is a placeholder cutscene file, with no quest triggers or content tied to it, suggesting it was scrapped early in development. In early previews leading up to the first network test, Dark Souls 2 featured a highly advanced shadow system that was heavily promoted. It made many dungeons nearly pitch black, forcing players to choose between wielding a torch or keeping a shield or two-handed weapon equipped. However, this feature was ultimately scrapped due to both gameplay balance and technical limitations. The lighting system was so complex it caused severe performance issues, with the game running at just a few frames per second. Elden Ring revisits this concept in several underground areas, where pitch-black catacombs and deep caverns require a torch to navigate properly. Thanks to modern hardware, this effect is now much more feasible compared to the constraints of the 7th-generation consoles that Dark Souls 2 had to support. Dark Souls 3 originally included a feature called Epitaphs, interactable graves that provided flavor text and bits of lore throughout the world. These were present in the alpha and had been created for every zone, but were ultimately cut from the final release. Elden Ring revives this concept through ghostly apparitions that offer lore about specific areas, characters, or dungeons, as well as the buried Great Blades found in the fields of battle across the overworld, which provide flavor text recounting major battles in the game's history. In an interview, George R.R. Martin referred to Elden Ring as a sequel to Dark Souls, which it isn't. Martin has previously admitted that his familiarity with modern video games is limited, so it's widely accepted this was an honest mistake. He may have meant it in the sense of a spiritual successor, which Elden Ring definitely is. Needless to say, he hasn't faced much criticism for the slip. Fulgor, the Dark Drift Knight in Nightreign, doesn't have many standout strengths or weaknesses. He's vulnerable to lightning, resistant to holy damage, and is susceptible to all status effects under normal conditions. Adele the Gaping Jaw in Nightreign is particularly vulnerable to poison. He has standard susceptibility to scarlet rot, sleep, and frostbite, but boasts strong resistance to lightning and bleed, along with a minor resistance to fire. As the Dragon Knight Lord in Nightreign, Caligo the Fisher in the Fog has surprisingly few vulnerabilities. She's resistant to slashing and striking attacks, standard magic, lightning, and holy damage. She also has strong resistance to frostbite and sleep, while showing higher than average resistance to most other status effects. Her only notable weaknesses are fire and striking weapons. Because so little is definitively known about Hailstor, much of his identity remains shrouded in ambiguity. The Knight of the Lord relic tells of a man, presumably Hailstor, who was once a knight, and after being defeated alongside his comrades by a mysterious hero, cursed the world. However, key details are missing: the war he fought in, which side he was on, the identity of the hero, and how he came to wield, or possibly originate, the power of the knight itself, eventually becoming its true lord. His title, Primordial Night Lord, might suggest that he predates the Shattering, but it's unclear whether primordial refers to age or simply to being the first of his kind. Libra, the equilibrious beast in Nightreign, is notably the only Night Lord vulnerable to madness, which is also his primary weakness. He has minor resistances to standard magic, frostbite, and bleed, and is completely immune to sleep. Libra also shows slight weaknesses to slashing attacks, holy, and fire damage, while being normally susceptible to poison and scarlet rot. Libra in Nightreign appears heavily inspired by Baphomet, featuring a tall humanoid form with a goat's head and large eyes embedded in his curled horns. He embodies the union of opposing forces, holy and frenzy, and is deeply fixated on concepts like balance, fairness, and neutrality, viewing the indiscriminate destruction caused by the night as the purest form of equilibrium. Scarlet Rot appears to be the most effective tool against all the Night Lords in Nightreign, as none are immune and only a few have mild resistance. In contrast, standard magic damage proves less useful. None are weak to it, and nearly half have some resistance. Libra in Nightreign is directly referred to as a demon, and the Knight of the Demon relic confirms he existed before the night itself began. This makes the concept and origin of demons in this world unclear and mysterious. Some speculate a connection to the frenzied flame due to his ties to frenzy and false gold, but this theory remains uncertain. Noster, the sentient pest, has two distinct aspects with different weaknesses and resistances. The moth aspect is highly vulnerable to fire and slightly weak to all types of physical attacks. It has strong resistance to non-elemental magic and poison, while taking normal damage from scarlet rot, bleed, frostbite, and sleep. It also has slight resistance to both lightning and holy damage. The scorpion aspect shares the fire weakness, but also takes increased damage from striking and piercing weapons. However, it has slight resistance to standard and slashing attacks, as well as holy, lightning, and poison damage. It remains normally affected by other status ailments. Hailstorm, the night aspect in Nightreign, has two distinct phases. In the first phase, it's vulnerable to slashing and piercing attacks, as well as fire and holy damage, but resists striking damage. In its second phase, it becomes resistant to slashing, but weak to striking and piercing attacks, along with lightning and holy damage. Both phases are immune to all status ailments except scarlet rot and sleep, though it has a strong resistance to the latter. Fulgor is the only Night Lord who breaks the usual naming pattern, typically boss name, title of Night, instead being called the Champion of Night Glow. Only the final boss shares a similar deviation, known simply as the Night Lord. This shift might be due to Fulgor being the only Night Lord without a distinct gimmick, as his moveset is focused almost entirely on swordplay. While dragons are a staple in From Software titles, Caligo's fight stands out with mechanics that break from traditional Souls-like design. With huge area of effect attacks and a hide-behind-the-pillar phase, the encounter feels more like something out of an MMO or Monster Hunter than Elden Ring. Though this shift aligns with Nightreign's gameplay style, Caligo's battle is still a major departure from dragon fights in both the base game and From Software's usual formula. Elden Ring is no stranger to the horrifying and surreal, and Nightreign continues that tradition. Still, this man's vile actions and the violent fate he inflicted on the girl who would become the Revenant serve as a particularly jarring reminder of what something like the Night or Hollowing would truly mean for those without the safeguard of resurrective immortality. It's a stark, often overlooked reality in FromSoft's more mythic narratives, people meeting gruesome, tragic ends at the hands of those they once trusted and loved. Hailstorm appears to have a vague connection to the Nox, though the nature of that link remains unclear. In the original game, the Nox were said to be awaiting a Lord of Night, and even attempted to create one through mimic tear experiments. It's uncertain whether Hailstorm is the fulfillment of that prophecy, a separate entity entirely, or a corrupted reflection of what the Nox were hoping to bring forth. Maris's alien-like design as a sea creature tied to sleep magic, along with its eerie arena, echoes themes linked to the outer gods in Elden Ring. Yet since no known outer god is connected to sleep, Maris's true origins remain shrouded in mystery. Maris, the Fathom of the Deep in Nightreign, is especially vulnerable to lightning, with a moderate weakness to slashing damage. It exhibits strong resistance to fire, and slight resistance to striking and piercing attacks, as well as standard magic and holy damage. The only status effects it can be afflicted by are Scarlet Rot and Frostbite, though it has above-average resistance to both. In Nightreign, Gladius boasts strong resistance to fire, poison, and frostbite, along with moderate resistance to Scarlet Rot and Bleed. He's susceptible to sleep like most foes, but his primary vulnerability is clearly holy damage, though he also takes higher than average damage from piercing attacks. Libra in Nightreign draws his power from a questionable form of alchemy that creates false gold. While gold traditionally symbolized order in the original game, Libra's imitation gold instead spreads frenzy, an element tied to chaos.